is a founding member of the New Americans Initiative, and there's more information outside about that initiative. She's also the co-host of the podcast. You're co-creator of it too. Where are y'all really from? Which I encourage y'all to check out. She also happens to be a state representative. More personally, Nima was born and raised right here in Louisville. She has a wonderful sense of humor and a most infectious laugh. And she's one of the most passionate, caring, and kind people you'll ever have the privilege to meet. As I mentioned earlier, she's going to give a short presentation, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A about what the immigrant community is facing and how we can stand up in solidarity. Nima?
All right, can everyone see me? These podiums are not built for short people. Oh, can you hear me now? Okay, all right. Everyone can see me, everyone can hear me, okay? Well, I want to start by thanking you, Russ, and thank all of you for inviting me to this beautiful, moving, and very nourishing ceremony this morning. It's exactly, I think, what I needed in this time of chaos and confusion and fear. When Russ invited me to speak, I thought a lot about what I would talk about today, just given everything that's been going on, all the news we're hearing, all of the people, our neighbors, our communities that are also moving in fear and uncertainty along with our immigrant neighbors. And I kept thinking about what I would talk about. And the idea that I kept coming back to over and over was freedom. The concept of it, the feeling of it. And it's been top of mind, certainly for me personally, in my work and in my day-to-day life, because it feels like every single day there's a new restriction, a new limitation, a new reminder that we can't take any of the freedoms that we all enjoy for granted. We talk about freedom all the time in this country. It's written into our founding documents. It's printed on bumper stickers, on campaign signs. It's the word that we all reach for when we describe who we are as Americans. But the truth is, freedom doesn't always mean the same thing for everybody. For some people, freedom is something they can always count on. But for others, it's something they have to fight for every single day. And lately, I've been asking myself what freedom really looks like, not as an abstract, as a slogan or an ideal, but as something that is lived and something that is felt. One of my favorite authors, Toni Morrison, said, "The function of freedom is to free someone else." And that line stays with me because it's a reminder that freedom isn't a possession, it's a responsibility. It asks something of us, to look beyond our own comfort, beyond symbols, and to see freedom as the work that we do for each other. So when I think about freedom, I don't think about flags or slogans or speeches. I think about people like my parents who packed up their lives in India and to start over in a country thousands of miles away. I think about the quiet kind of courage that it takes to begin again, to believe that a new country will give your children a chance to belong. That's what freedom looked like in my family, not something big or loud, but something that was earned every single day through hope and persistence. And yet the longer that I've lived here, the more I've come to see that freedom in this country has never really been evenly shared, as we all know. So the question that I bring to you this morning is, what do we do when freedom becomes selective? What do we do when the promise of belonging and the ideals that we all strive for, when those promises are broken? When I first started working in immigration law about 15 years ago now, I began to see up close the challenges that so many families face just trying to build a life here, the confusion, the fear, the waiting, and the hope. And we heard a lot of that in the songs and the stories that we've been privileged to hear this morning. So it looks like a father working 2 jobs while waiting 10 years just to be able to apply for a green card. It looks like a mother who's afraid to go to the doctor because she's afraid she might be reported. A child brought here at age 2, now in college, still without any pathway to citizenship. All of them living in that shadow space, now afraid sometimes of their own neighbors and their community. They're here, but they're not allowed to belong. And the truth is, again, we can see this every day, that things are getting worse right now, not better. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what is happening right now in 2025. Just this year, we implemented a new federal policy that requires all undocumented immigrants who are aged 14 and over to register with the government and carry documentation at all times under threat of fines or prosecution. This is something we haven't done in this country since the 1950s, and it turns human beings into suspects every hour of every day. The United States has suspended all refugee admissions, effectively freezing resettlement for thousands of families who are already approved to resettle here, but are now stuck back home. And now there's talk of setting next year's refugee numbers as low as 7,500 nationwide. This is the lowest number in our modern history, while at the same time suggesting that preference might be given to white South African farmers. And I want you all to just let that sink in. The United States, America, is trying to implement a refugee policy that prioritizes skin color. Legal immigrants. These are folks I work with every day. There are professionals, there are healthcare workers, there are nurses. They're following every single rule, and there are a lot of very complicated rules for them to follow. They've done it the right way, but they're now facing visa suspensions and potential deportation because of expanded public charge definitions and new background checks that are being implemented. So families who have lived here in the United States for decades are suddenly being told that they don't belong, having done everything right. And finally, we have a new executive order, of course it's been challenged in the courts, that's attempting to limit birthright citizenship, which is a direct challenge to our 14th Amendment in our Constitution. That's not just a policy, that's not just a piece of paper, it's an attack, a direct attack on our Constitution itself. This isn't border security. It's an architecture based on fear. And it's one that quietly decides who gets to belong and who doesn't. And what many people don't see, because it happens away from the cameras and away from the headlines, is how deeply and quietly the machinery and the apparatus of detention is rapidly expanding and has already expanded. So we hear about raids, we see what's happening in Chicago and Los Angeles, and the headline-grabbing enforcement raids, the shock and awe nature of them, that's what we read about, that's what we see, but it's the visible tip of a much larger iceberg. And some of that includes increased authority for something called expedited removal, which allows individuals to be detained and deported without any legal process whatsoever, or even access to a judge. So their case is never fully heard, or heard at all. There's expanded use of something called mandatory administrative detention, which means that people can be held indefinitely without bond, without arguing their case, and sometimes without any clear legal rights whatsoever. It's an increase in partnerships between federal agencies and local jails, including in Kentucky, that converts many of our counties or municipal lockups, jails, into de facto federal immigration detention centers, which means that it shifts the oversight that we would ordinarily expect in these facilities away from federal standards and into places with little to no safeguards. It means cutbacks or delays in actual legal representation, especially for detained immigrants, making due process just an illusion. There are so many detainees that are facing removal without understanding their rights, without understanding the charges being levied at them, or being able to mount any kind of a defense. And I want to just point something out that a lot of people don't know. There's currently a 3.2 million case backlog in our immigration courts, Our immigration courts are housed in the Department of Justice. 3.2 million cases, 0 additional funding allocated to address those delays and that backlog, while over $170 billion was allocated to detention and removal operations. That's where our priorities are. And in those facilities, federal, local, the conditions are worsening for the people that we're sending there and keeping there because of overcrowding, because of lack of access to adequate medical care, substandard legal access. That is a huge need in Kentucky. There are very few immigration attorneys, and it reduces dramatically the chances of you having any chance to apply for any benefit, even though you may be eligible, simply because you don't know what the process is. And there's little to no oversight by outside monitors. I want to say something quickly about detention centers. They're federal. They're privately owned. There are 2, maybe 3 companies, for-profit companies, that run all of the federal detention centers in this country. So you could be picked up, taken to Oldham County, and find yourself in Louisiana or Texas the same day. You don't get any due process rights because immigration violations are civil, not criminal. So you don't get a right to an attorney, you don't get a right to a phone call, you don't get a right to a speedy trial. None of those things are available, so you're simply taken and disappeared into the black hole that is our detention system. And it's an apparatus that we've built around a civil violation. Immigration law is administrative law, like tax law. It should be the most boring area of law that you could possibly imagine. And yet it is the most devastating, as we can see, in terms of its impact, and it's directly due to a lack of improvement, a lack of just simple updating by Congress because of its political nature. It's also the most political area of law, and I'm sure we all recognize that here. But it also has expanded alternative detention. So one of the other things you don't see, you do see people getting pulled away, getting put into cages, into detention facilities, but the expansion of alternative detention techniques has also increased, like ankle monitors, GPS tracking, and house arrests. And that's grown much larger as a way to surveil and restrict freedom without the scrutiny that those flashier raids and detention operations may get. And all of this expansion of detention, removal, and enforcement, criminalizing people that are here because they don't have the right paperwork, points to a very simple truth that when fear becomes policy, freedom begins to shrink, not just for immigrants, not just for a few, but for all of us. And we all know that fear spreads quietly but quickly. And the more that we accept it, the smaller our own freedom becomes. The thing about freedom is it's not who can shout it the loudest. It's not about what you can see the most. It's about who among us is willing to stand up for others. And it loses its meaning if it only applies to people who already feel safe. It doesn't mean anything if it only belongs to people who look or sound like you. So when we say this is the land of the free, who are we talking about? Freedom that excludes anybody is privilege in disguise. And when empathy disappears, that privilege becomes indifference. And this is where I'm reminded, I know everyone here, I'm sure, has heard of Edward R. Murrow, and I want to share some words of his that he spoke during in another era of fear and accusation on national television. And he said, "We will not walk in fear, one of another. We will not be driven by fear into an age of unreason if we dig deep into our history and doctrine and remember that we are not descended from fearful men, not from men who fear to write, to speak, to associate, and to defend causes which were for the moment unpopular." His words were aimed at McCarthyism, but I think they echo pretty perfectly today, because fear, both then and now, is used to divide, to silence, and to control, and courage in the face of that fear, then and now, is what leads us back to who we truly are. The current administration has continued policies that criminalize migration instead of managing it with compassion or even common sense. We're seeing increased deportations, continued family separations, and asylum restrictions that leave very, very vulnerable people stranded in extremely dangerous conditions. But the thing is that none of this is inevitable. It may seem that way to us, but every cruel policy that we see, that we have ever seen, is the result of a decision that's been made, and every decision can be changed. So what can you do? I get this question a lot. As an attorney, I can always say, well, I'm trying to help families on a case-by-case basis or through my nonprofit, but people are so concerned, and it is heartening and it is encouraging to see the outpouring of support and compassion and willingness to stand up and do something, whatever it is, to help our friends and neighbors. You don't have to be a lawyer, you don't have to be a legislator to make a difference. The main thing that I tell people is that you have to show up. You have to show up over and over and over again in ways that affirm the humanity of those who are being dehumanized today. And I wrote down just a quick few points, because these I think are, kind of culmination of things that I've heard and ways that I've thought about people getting involved. The first thing, the most important thing, is learn the truth. Learn what is actually the truth. Don't let fear or misinformation shape your understanding of what is going on in immigration today, to immigrants today. You want to make sure that you seek out real stories, understand from the people that are being impacted on a daily basis, from community groups that are dealing with directly impacted communities, and from organizations that are working on the ground, what is actually happening, what's happening nationwide, what is happening in Kentucky, what is happening in your own backyard. That leads into supporting those local organizations. Here in Louisville, we have a wealth of resources that help our immigrant communities and organizations like Kentucky Refugee Ministries, La Casita Center, Americana Community Center. There's a long list of organizations and groups that are directly serving our immigrant communities who need your support. You're not going to hear from them. They're not going to be on the news. They are trying to keep their community safe. They're trying to protect the vulnerable people that they're serving. So you would need to be proactive and ask them, what do they need? Do they need help helping their families find housing, legal support, or anything in between? You want to advocate. This is a very engaged group, so I know you all know who your elected representatives and senators are locally, state, and federally. You want to contact them. You want to keep contacting them at every single level, city, state, federal, and tell them that you support pathways to citizenship. I've agreed with Rand Paul more in the last few months than I have ever in my entire life. Because all he's saying is, let's be rational about this. You have 11 plus million undocumented individuals, and there is no mechanism. So even if they wanted to do it the right way, there's no way for them to do it. Create a pathway to citizenship. It might take 20 years, but they'll do it. Put them on a pathway to make sure that they can work and live safely in your community and continue contributing to that community. At a bottom line level, if you don't care about anybody on a human level, it's adding to the tax base. Find whatever argument makes sense and just make it happen. Contact your representatives and tell them that they need to support pathways to citizenship. They need to support fair asylum processes. And they need to support humane treatment at the border and in our detention facilities. You can write them, you can call them, you can go to them, to their offices. We are all paying our elected representatives to do one job, and that is to represent us. And we need to remind them of that every chance that we can get. Silence is complicity. If you can't do one or the other, any small step that you can take to affirm somebody or create spaces of belonging. This is something that you all are good at. You're doing it today. You do it for your own members. It could be in your workplace. It could be in your neighborhood. It could be in your home. It could be here. But make sure that immigrants today, or any group that is being marginalized or dehumanized, feels safe, feels heard, and feels seen. Any of those things count. It doesn't have to be big, loud actions. It doesn't have to be something that is outside your comfort zone or far away from you geographically. Any small step that you take to make sure we see people as human in our communities is going to help fight what we are seeing today. And sometimes the most powerful act of freedom is simply to welcome somebody in. Welcome them into your home, welcome them into your church, say a kind word to somebody. As someone who came to this country as an immigrant, I was born in India. We moved to Louisville when I was around 6, 7-ish. I've worked as an immigration attorney, and I've served as the only immigrant in the Kentucky legislature. The first and only. I was elected in 2018. We need a lot more people like me in elected office. We need a lot more people with the perspectives and the sympathy and the compassion and the understanding of an experience that's other than your own. Because the reason we're able to exploit all of these fears and anxieties and create this level of chaos and confusion is because people refuse to, at this point, sometimes willingly or unwillingly, they refuse to see what is beyond their own nose. If you don't look like me, you cannot relate to my upbringing, you can't relate to my family, you're an other, and you're not a part of me, my community, or my country. And that is a prevailing sentiment for people who have never been exposed to a different life, a different experience, or a different perspective. So even if all you do is have a conversation where you've changed someone's perspective, that's a massive, massive help. It's an incredible opportunity, and taking everything, every moment as a teaching moment is something we can all certainly relate to and can do in our day-to-day lives. But as an immigration attorney, and especially in our legislature, I've seen both the promise and the pain of our system, of our democracy. And that's why I founded New Americans Initiative, which Russ mentioned earlier. We are always looking for volunteers. There's a sign-up sheet out there. But the purpose of it is simple. It's basically to connect new Americans, so naturalized citizens, with the resources, support, legal pathways they need to fully participate in our democracy. So there is a legal workshop component to it, there is a voter registration component to it, and there's a civic engagement component to it. Because we see all the time in Frankfurt and certainly in Washington, the same people asking for the same things. There's lobbyists, there's special interest groups. What we rarely hear from are people who are directly impacted by policy. Doesn't have to be immigration policy. It can be a healthcare policy. It can be a housing policy, but you never hear from our foreign-born communities in those spaces. And that's something that has to change if we're going to change the minds and the perspectives of the people making the laws that impact us. So breaking down barriers also is part of what we try to do, whether it's in employment and education and licensing or language access. And that goes a long way in helping people that are prevented from contributing their full talents and living with dignity in our state. I created the nonprofit because it's a different way that I've been able to really kind of implement, I guess, the values that I hold dear. And it's a way for me. It's a way for me to show and confirm and reaffirm that I believe that Kentucky's strength and the strength of our country is its diversity, its people, and the shared commitment to opportunity. I'll share just a little bit about my background. I mentioned that I moved to this country when I was 6 or 7. I became a U.S. citizen when I was 14 years old, And I remember raising my hand and taking the oath of allegiance to uphold and defend our Constitution. And even back then, I realized, because I had to think about it, what am I swearing to? And being the nerd that I am, I had to read what the oath said and had some concerns about the bearing arms, all of that. But I realized even back then that freedom is not something that you just receive once and keep forever. It's something that you have to build and shape every single day through your actions, your choices, and your individual acts of courage. Right now, what this country needs most is people willing to build that kind of genuine freedom once more. Not the narrow kind that excludes anybody, but the broad, generous kind that includes everybody. Because the story of this country, the story of America, is constant movement. People crossing oceans, borders, boundaries, searching for safety, for dignity, and the opportunity that America has always promised and holds itself out as a beacon of. So our task today is not to defend freedom by keeping others out, which seems to be what this definition has morphed into, but it's to make freedom strong enough to let people in. And far from the boogeyman that some have made it out to be, inclusion isn't charity. It's the work that we need to do to keep this country honest. It's how we hold on to the promise that brought so many of us or our ancestors here. So the fight for humane immigration is not just about policy, it's about who we are as a country and who we want to become. I'm going to go back to Murrow's quote and his challenge because it speaks directly again to us now. We must not confuse dissent with disloyalty. We must remember always that accusation is not proof, and conviction depends upon evidence and due process of law. He repeats, we will not walk in fear one of another. So let us all be, in his words, not descended from fearful men, but from people of conscience, of compassion, and of courage. I wasn't raised in the Christian faith. I was raised in the Hindu tradition, so I was very glad to hear Russ's words. Chosen words from the Vedas. But I've also heard these words all my life growing up in Kentucky. Love your neighbor. Welcome the stranger. This is not a concept. These are not considerations that are unique or exclusive to any one religion or faith tradition, but they are a reminder of what it means to be human. Every single faith and moral tradition worth holding on to tells us the same thing. In essence, that our freedom, our safety, and our future are all tied to how we treat one another. When I think about those words, I think about my own family, arriving here with very few possessions, but with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of hope. And I think about the people that I've met through my work, men and women who work hard, who pay taxes, who raise their children, and who still believe, even today, still believe that this country will live up to its promises. The message of loving your neighbor and welcoming the stranger hasn't changed in thousands of years across hundreds of faith traditions. And we're called now, at this moment, to remember our own stories and to act from that memory, to see in every newcomer, every stranger, a reflection of ourselves, to understand that the love of a neighbor and the love of stranger are not separate ideas. It's the same moral truth that keeps our freedom alive. Because the only real freedom is the kind that welcomes, that sees, that lifts, that makes room, and that makes every act of welcome an act of faith. A faith in each other and faith in what is possible. So I would make the call that the work before us today, for all of us, is to make freedom real for everyone who chooses to call this place home. I want to thank you for inviting me here today, and I do want to open it up. I wanted to give some space and some time for any comments or questions that you all may have, because every presentation I give, and it's usually very dry and legal, There are always questions about, or questions, concerns, just updates, anything that you all want to share. So I'll open it up to that right now. But I do want to thank you all very much. I'm very grateful for being able to be in this space with you today.
We have time for a couple of questions or comments, so I'm going to take a couple. And Brody, if you can check on Zoom and see if we have any coming on.
Hi, my name is Susie. My son-in-law, he's Venezuelan. They live in Los Angeles County. He and his parents and his older brother moved from Venezuela to Cleveland, Ohio, when he was 3. He's now 49. He's legal. He has, everything. He used to not carry all of his papers until this year. And they are very nervous. ICE has come to their daughter's school. And thank goodness the school, the principal, everyone was able to keep them out. But they were all fearful of when the children left the school to walk home. Some of them did not come back to school the next day. And so I'm constantly thinking of him, my daughter. His first name is Angel. He's an angel. His wife, my daughter, she has stage 4 cancer. He's been there for everything. They're trying to focus on that, but it's hard to always focus just on that when he has had family already picked up by ICE. And it's just impossible to think of what all can happen.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. It is incredibly difficult. It's a reminder, too, that life goes on. Life is continuing to happen. And what we are doing with the policies that we're implementing, and we are all part of it. This is our country. It's our government doing this. That the policies that we're forcing people to endure is hurting them and not helping them just navigate the regular difficulties of life. And it is something that whoever is making the laws, it's on purpose, right? The fear, the confusion, the chaos is on purpose. But it is incumbent on us to change it, to work towards changing it. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It might take 4 years. And some of the policies that we've implemented, the damage is going to take decades to fix. So this is a long haul situation, but we have to start somewhere, and we have to start now.
Hi, my name is Carmen. I work with the justice-involved population, and I have a number of folks actively on supervision right now who are in varying states of their immigration process. Many of them, their documentation may have been revoked due to being justice involved. I have a practical resource question because a number of folks, including one I'm meeting with this week, is currently undocumented, unclear how that happened, but is also court-ordered by her judge as part of her probation to obtain legal employment. And so I'm kind of at a loss right now because if I were to try to send her potentially to go get documentation, she could end up deported. So I'm curious if there are any resources that you would point to that, because I've got folks from Latin America, I've got folks from Africa, I've got folks from the Middle East, et cetera. Is there somewhere I can refer these folks to try to get them the resources without directly endangering them?
So the first thing I would say is to get them connected with an immigration attorney if they haven't already been. And that's really just to assess, do they have eligibility for some immigration benefit, right? Whether it's humanitarian, through a family, through an employer, what can be done? And it's sort of underscoring the impossibility of our system and the the short-sightedness and just the sort of rational thing that you would expect, none of that makes any sense, right? You're court ordered to get a job. You're not legally allowed to work here. And if you go to any official office or department or agency, you could get picked up and then put into that detention black hole that I was referring to. So I think the first thing that you want to do is have them talk to an attorney and figure out what options they have. And I have a list of referral attorneys that are willing to take on these cases, or at least do consultations to see what their options are. But it is, yeah, it's one of the other things I didn't really mention. I mentioned expedited removal, but I didn't mention the expansion of ICE detainers that our city, one of the only ones that was threatened, actually did. And that is the easiest pipeline for ICE to pick up people, right? And you could be put in jail or just detained for a DUI over a misunderstanding that never actually even goes to court. Whatever it is that you're doing there, whether you committed a crime or not, maybe you can't afford bail, right? But that means that ICE can go to the jail and have them hold you after you've done whatever it is that you've been ordered to do for 48 hours, and then just put you into the detention machine. And traffic stops are one of the biggest conduits for law enforcement to do. You have a broken taillight, your license is expired, you don't have a license, you get taken there, held, and then put into detention. So it is, I think you're gonna see a lot more cases like that, unfortunately, and they can't work, so you can't send them to an employer. The employer will get raided. It's a problem, but I think the very first thing that they need to do is see whether they have any options for staying in the country and being able to work legally. And I can share that with you.
Let's thank Nima again for her presentation and
Thank
her
you very much.
passion and her leadership. We do have some information tables out. We have Kentucky Refugee Ministries, who is launching a new initiative next week. We have Showing Up for Racial Justice and the Community Defense Network, and Nima and the New Americans Initiative are all out with some information, with some invitations, specifically with some invitations around how we can plug in as individuals, as congregations, as communities. So I invite you to take a minute during coffee hour as you go get the treats to stop by the tables and learn about what some of us have, what some of our neighbor partner organizations have to offer. All right, we're going to close with song number 134. Katie?
Our world is one world. Our world is one world. The touch is one, affects us all. The seas that wash us round about, the clouds that cover us, and rains that fall. Our world is one world. The thoughts we think affect us all. The way we build the love with love, or how we tear the bridge or wall. Our world is one world. Its ways of wealth affect us all. The way we spend, the way we share, who are the rich or poor, who stand or fall. Our world is one world, just like a ship that bears us all, where fear and greed make many holes, but where our hearts can hear a different call.
I invite you to join hands for our closing words of blessing. Thank you for joining us in our service today, both in the room and on Zoom. Please stick around for conversation and networking and coffee in Weston Hall here at the church and in breakout rooms on Zoom. We end our service now and extinguish the chalice with these words of blessing. Before I do, just another reminder, we do have also, the Justice Center also has We Love Our Neighbors yard signs. Please stop by the table and grab one if you haven't already taken one. Our closing words. We either find safety or we create it with who and what we have. Belonging is about bringing us back into the world around us, back into relationship with others. Dignity is where we feel our worthiness again, where we are about the business of eradicating shame and expressing our agency and choicefulness. Amen. Ashe. Shalom.